All right, everyone, welcome in. Welcome in. It is time for another round of the Secure the Bag Book Club. I'm Brooke Brown. I am your esteemed host and not a guru, not an expert, but merely someone who values self education and thinks that it is the one edge advantage that we have in terms of growing and protecting our wealth. I created this space so that we could talk about nonfiction books that relate to wealth building. So we've talked about things like tax planning, we've talked about things like buying art, securing intellectual property, real estate, investing in the stock market. And this month we're talking about credit. The book that we are talking about this month is your Score. Let me see. There we go. Your Score and Insider's Secrets to Understanding, Controlling, and Protecting Your Credit Score by Anthony Davenport. And I must say, this book just keeps getting better and better. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section in the live chat if you're watching live. Or if you're watching later on, let me know in the comments what you guys think of the book so far. I am really getting a lot of value out of it, and I hope you are too. So, without further ado, let's get started on today's agenda. So, the chapters that we covered were chapters 6, 7, and 8 this past week. One was on the topic of home purchase preparation, or that was chapter 6. Chapter 7 was caring for credit cards, and chapter 8 was identity theft protection. Those weren't the exact titles of the chapters, but that's the topics that they covered. So, I get why the author started with the Big Bang, right? Which is, hey, a home purchase is the largest credit application that you're going to make probably in your life. So you're going to want to be prepared for the process, right? When you think about the vetting process that the mortgage company goes through in order to validate your income, validate your credit, make sure that you have all the things in process, including inspections and appraisals and all that stuff that I've actually went through myself because I purchased my home back in 2019. And I had to go through this process of them pulling my credit and telling me, "Hey, this is your score. Let's talk. What your interest rate is going to be." So here's the thing that he talked about in terms of preparing yourself for that home purchase. First things first, your credit score is top of mind for every lender. They're going to want to know your score first and foremost. They're not going to want to know, that you're famous or that you have a business or that the income, none of that, not just yet anyways. What they're going to want to know is your credit score and how you measure up against other people with similar credit profiles. Then they're going to look at your credit profile and they're going to want to see something very important. And that is they're going to want to see, do you have a variety of accounts, right? It's not just credit cards that you have, but have you paid responsibly on installment loans, such as student loans or auto loan, right? Then, of course, there's the revolving credit, like your credit cards, your store credit cards, those kinds of things. And then, of course, there is medical debt, which is also considered an installment loan because it's a fixed rate. I mean, it's a fixed amount and it's paid in installments over time. So, of course, you want to have different kinds of accounts, different variety of accounts. Ideally, you would want to have about 4 or 5 accounts open. That would look a very strong profile for the creditors to look at. And then, of course, you also want to look at, they're also going to want to look at the age of your account. So you didn't just open everything up all of a sudden last year because you were thinking about buying a house. No, you over time, especially if it's the older the better. I have a credit card myself that I have had since probably 2013. Maybe that was the first time I got my first credit card. I was fresh out of grad school and I was like, I need to establish credit. And so that's what I did. That was 2013. And then, but I stayed away from credit cards for a long time. So, I mean, hey, it's good to be cautious and aware of your affordability and things like that. But being in the credit game is is just a reality. You can't afford to sit it out. So let's see. Then of course they're going to look into your income, final piece of the puzzle, your income and the affordability equation as it relates to how much house can you actually afford based on your income. Ideally, the book mentions that they're looking at about 28% max your gross of your monthly income. So 28% of your gross monthly income is what an ideal affordability rate would be for a mortgage plus fees. Not fees, taxes, I meant. So housing and taxes. There you go. Um, so what happens, worst case scenario, that you have a less than optimal credit score? Well, there's a lot of things that are affected by that, and one of the things is of course your interest rate that will be higher if you have a less than optimal score. And then also you could have more upfront fees. This is what the mortgage industry calls points, right? You pay more at the closing table because you're trying to compensate for the fact that you're a higher risk because you don't have the greatest credit history or the credit profile that they're looking for. And then the other thing that they mentioned, which I thought was important to remember, is PMI, and it is what is it called? I think it's prime mortgage insurance or something like that. I can't remember the actual acronym for it, but it is something that if you pay less than the 15 to 20% down on your home purchase, it is a fee that's tacked on, and it's again an extra piece of risk management for the mortgage company on in doing the deal with you. Okay, so those were, and I just wanted to reference that those were on page 87 and 8 through 89. That those instructions slash tips and things like that. So go back and look at that. I also want to remind you that the Spotify playlist, the Secure the Bag Book Club Spotify playlist for premium members, has all the audiobooks that we have gone over so far, and we've gone over about 6 or 7 books so far. So hey, if you're wanting to catch up, if you want to watch the old videos, the old streams, they're all available for you to take a look, when you are looking into the different topics that we've covered. So there you go. And then another thing, that on page 92, there was a quote that I was like, oh my gosh, are you serious right now? So for educational purposes, credit score that I've seen, because I fully plan on pulling my FICO score, but that costs money. So just FYI. But the free ones, the freecreditreport.com, the Credit Karma, all those kinds of accounts, they are vanity metrics. They follow a different algorithm and different formula than your typical FICO score would be. So just know that you could be looking at a score that's maybe 50 to 100 points higher than what your actual FICO score would be. Now, on page 92, it said it's much easier to drop from 750 to 680 than it is to drop from 680 to 610. And I was mad. I was incensed when I read that, because I have an 800, I think it's 810 credit score according to my bank, and I notice that it's an 810 score. Let me tell you, it's very touchy. It's very touchy. And what are you guys' opinion of the different educational purposes scores that are out there? What do you feel like you probably could be doing better with it? Do you feel like the simulators are accurate for your purposes? Let me know in the comment section. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about that. So, yeah. So anyways, it talked about the different ways that you need to prepare for the mortgage conversation. One of them is making sure you get your true score, right? So that FICO score. Then you also want to erase scoring mistakes. Yes, we've been talking about how important it is. And in previous chapters, we talked about, how to get those, dings and marks and mistakes and errors and all that kind of stuff erased from your credit profile. So Yes, getting on that, making sure that the account balances and open accounts you see are correct. They are you. You did them. Those kinds of things. And then, of course, you want to keep collections buried. So I thought that was very interesting. That you kind of want to let sleeping dogs lie, if you will, when it comes to those older dings. Maybe something went into collections and you haven't heard from them in a while. But it's been years. You don't want to resurrect that. Arrangement, if you will, if you can help it, because that newer activity is going to apply more heavily to your credit profile than if you had just let it, kind of be something that it's in the past. It's in the past. So there you go. And then you want to manage your credit accounts. It pointed out that the closer you are to your credit limit on an individual card, the worse your score will be. So again, you think about the fact that they're looking for a credit mix. They're looking for a mix of accounts. They're looking for credit utilization, right? They're looking for how much of your available limit are you actually using and carrying a balance on each month. So you want to be mindful of that and keep it as low as possible when you are seeking to go after getting a mortgage. And then you want to improve your credit score profile. Of course, he pointed out that the best to have is 4 or 5 lines open. And when you get just ahead of 60 days from having your credit pulled for your mortgage, you're going to want to both zero out your credit cards if possible, and also refrain from using them as much as possible. Okay. So, and then of course, you want to lastly know your options. And that was really a good point to be made, because when we talk about knowing our credit score and our credit profile and knowing what's on there, that is leverage for us in the negotiation process. When we're at the table talking to a lender, we want to be able to say, my credit score is strong, I know this, and I want your best rates. There it is. Don't and then just sit there and see what they have to offer, because they're counting on you. These lenders, they are counting on you to not know your stuff. And that's why Secure the Bag Book Club exists, because we want to be armed with information. Yes. Okay. Then the next chapter talked about credit card best practices. And it talked about keeping history on your side, essentially, right? So that's making sure that you have credit accounts that have been open for a significant period of time. The more years, the better, especially after 2 years. You want at least, to go. You want to space out your credit accounts. Then you want to maximize your payments above the minimum. So you look on your credit card statement and it'll say, hey, this is the minimum payment that we need you to make based off of your balance, if you're carrying a balance. And they're going to say, here's your interest, the amount that we were charging you in interest, if that applies. And then it's going to say something about when you make these minimum payments. They're required by law to tell you that if you make these minimum payments, this is how long it's going to take you to pay off this balance, assuming you don't use the information, or not the information, the card, and create an even bigger balance, right? So you might see on your credit card statement that, hey, your minimum is $40 on maybe a $500 balance. And then it'll say something like, if you pay the minimum $40, you're going to take 3 years. I'm just throwing numbers out there, but they'll say you're going to take 3 years to pay this off. I mean, you don't charge anything else, girl, or boy. And so you want to be mindful of that point when you are managing your credit balance and your credit accounts. Then one thing I also wanted to highlight in this chapter is that they are itching for an excuse to mess with your limit and your interest rate, and especially if something negative has happened with your credit profile. They're trolling your information. Every 2 years they evaluate, hey, she's she's been using credit more often. That might mean she's more of a risk. We're going to increase her interest rate so we can get more money out of her. Or they're going to lower your credit limit on that card. So you want to be mindful of that and keep track of that, and be abreast on when that is actually happening, because that may be a signal that something negative is happening with your credit profile, and you might want to look into it. So that's a sign. So don't ignore it. Don't think it's just a happenstance, or just something that happens, that they just do that from time to time. No, it might be a problem, and you want to be look into it. It also talked about your rights based off of the what is it called? The Credit Card Act or something like that. It's a law that the Obama administration put into place to protect consumers from less than, ideal practices from the credit card companies. Things like not giving you statements on a regular basis and all that kind of stuff. So yes, those are that section. The page about your rights is on page 103 in chapter 7, and I want to bring that to your attention because you should know as a consumer. There you go. And then the last part that I wanted to talk about before I get into a question that I have for you all is on page 106. It starts talking about the rescues, the rescue solutions when you are in a large amount of unmanageable credit card debt. And I feel like if you are drowning in credit card debt, there are some strategies that the book talks about that can help you pay less in interest and fees, can be advantageous to your credit profile, because you can juggle balances between other cards with better offers, maybe things like a no interest promo that you might be able to do a balance transfer on, those kinds of things. So yes, there you go. That's something that is an option for you. And then beyond that, chapter 8 talked about protections as it relates to identity theft. I'm not going to go into detail on that one because it was kind of involved, but hey, we do need to protect our information from fraudsters, and so that chapter is a very good one for us to just have that as basic knowledge. Okay, so my question for you all, and I want you guys to leave it in the chat or in the comments when we are done with this stream. So I'm starting to think next week is our last meeting for this book. And we are done with our conversation about credit management. So I wanted to know, what do you guys think the next read should be? Do you have a book in mind that you're just like, oh, Brooke would love this book, or the Secure the Bag Book Club totally needs to cover this book? Let me know. Do you want to look into books that are specific to certain topics? Like we've talked about the different topics, including taxes, including art, including, intellectual property and those kinds of things. So do you want to talk about a topic, or do you want to talk about maybe some historic profiles where we learn about, the history of certain economic phenomenons, and we can get a better grasp of how we fit into those kind of dynamics and things like, things that have impacted generations and all that good stuff. I'm curious about those things, and I would love to see if you guys are curious about them too. And then, or the last thing is, we could do some profiles. There are many, biographies of, wealthy people out there, the Rockefellers, there's the CEOs and, moguls and things like that. I've recently read 50 Cent's book, Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter, I think is the name of the book. And, it was a lot of fun to read. So maybe we need to, take a break for some topics, and we can maybe look at, some other rich people and see what their mode of operation is. So let me know in the comments, and we'll figure out what our next read is going to be, and I'll announce it next week. All right, so thank you so much for joining this stream. Again, shout yourself out in the comments if you came and joined. Would love to know, how you guys are enjoying this book and whether you're following along as we learn different topics. Really appreciate your participation. Thank you so much. And make sure you are telling the others. Spread the word. This is an important, thought exercise that we are going through here. And I want to make sure that as many people as possible are exposed to the topics that we cover. All right. All right. So thank you so much. And I will see you guys on the internet.